Now this illustration deals with branch circuits required in dwelling units in accordance with 210 11C4 and exception 2. Now let's just kind of read together this purpose of change. And it reads as follows. Exception 2 was added to permit a single bay garage to have all outlets within that garage to be served by the required 120 volt 20 amp branch circuit in accordance with 210.23A1 or A2. Note that the existing numbering of exceptions are modified to account for these changes. Now we're on page 82 of the NEC, and notice that ground fault protection for these electric vehicles, you can read more about it in 555.54C on page 559. And notice the note to the left. It basically says per 210.11A4 exception 2 that other outlets should be permitted to be supplied as permitted by 210.23A1 and A2. And then notice these they're 20 amp without the additional branch circuit is a 15 amp or greater, can serve other receptacle outlets in addition to the outlets that are just recently required, as we read about. But the additional branch circuits have to comply with 210.52G1 and 210.C4, and this would be a single bay entrance in accordance with 210.11C4 exception 2, and the vehicle charging here would be an electric type vehicle, and we'll read more about those as we go into this presentation. Now this illustration deals with a branch circuit extension or modifications as outlined in NEC 210.12. Now the boxed in information right next to the panel board is locations where these type of receptacle outlets must be AFCI protected as outlined in 210.12b. But I believe our note 1 and 2 kind of says it all, so let's just look at it right quick. Note 1, requirements apply when modified, replaced, or extended. So on any one of those three conditions, then 210.12e on page 83 of your NEC requires that these outlets be AFCI type outlets are protected as a AFCI type outlet. So that's the main purpose of this change. It was just basically a revision accepted and added to clarify AFCI requirements in a more detailed manner. And you can read all about this on page 82 and 83 of your NEC if you care to do so, or just completely read the text and the author's comment along with the purpose of change and Stallcup's illustrated code change book, and a lot more abundant information is there for you. Now this illustration deals with guest rooms and guest suites. Kind of deals with sleeping quarters in accordance with 210.12d on page 83 of your NEC. And mainly we're dealing with three areas of where a person could have sleeping quarters. Now notice your note 1 at the very top of the illustration. It basically states all 10, 15, and 20 amp receptacles must be GFCI protected per 210.12d as in dog. And these locations you can see right in the right below the bed there. Locations per 210.12d through 3. Note 2 basically reads, this section now covers 3 sleeping locations that are considered to have some fire risk per 210.12d1 through d3, where you can read about all 3. And notice it shows these receptacles do have to be AFCI type protected receptacles. And that's what this illustrating is illustrated. AFCI protected type receptacles, where the one by the sink you see there is GFCI and AFCI protected in accordance with 210.8B1, 210.12A1 through A6. And that was the main purpose of this change, is to recognize 3 sleeping areas where AFCI protection would be required. Now this illustration deals with guest rooms and guest suites. In accordance with NEC 210.17 1 through 3, including the informational notes 1 and 2 for additional information. Now, notice this purpose of change on page 83 of the NEC can basically be illustrated in the 4 notes that you see. Note 1 basically reads, if these facilities comply with the definition of a dwelling unit, hotel, motel, or assistant living, as outlined in 210.17 1 through 3. Now, let's read on. Note 2, these are guest rooms and guest suites that have provisions for permanent cooking. That's the key now. Permanent cooking as defined in Article 100 for a dwelling unit per 210.17. Now, a dwelling unit and, say, guest rooms and dwelling units and things like that can be defined in Article 100 on page 36. Hotels, motels, the whole area. And it's mainly, the key is permanent provisions for the cooking. You're going to have living areas, sleeping, and sanitation in these areas. But if you have permanent provisions for cooking, then you're considered a dwelling unit, and all the rules of a dwelling unit would be applicable in 210.52 and 210.8 and 210.12, along with other pertinent sections and requirements. And of course, now if we review Note 3, the informational note refers the electrician to 210.11C2 and 210.52F exception 2 for more information concerning laundry circuits and outlets and things like that. You know, that's the user of the code as well as the electrician making the installation and the wiring and the receptacles and lighting outlets and appliance outlets and so forth. Note 4, informational 2 refers users to the life safety code, and mainly section 3.3.198.12 for the definition of what is considered assistant living facilities. And when you review very carefully now 210.17 1 through 3, as well as the informational notes 1 and 2, then we can get a very good handle of what is required if it's just spaces or areas used for living, or rooms, maybe that's a better word to use, for living areas, sleeping, and sanitation. We're going to have those in guest rooms of hotels and motels and assistant living. But if you should have provisions for permanent cooking in that area too, then you have to classify it as a dwelling unit and apply all the regulation and rules pertaining to a dwelling unit. Now this illustration deals with permissive loads, multiple outlet branch circuits, 10 amp branch circuits, in accordance with NEC 210.23A1 and A2. Now in the illustration you can see different types of loads are connected to these branch circuits. Now the main purpose of the change is to list loads that can and cannot be connected to a 10 amp branch circuit type circuit. Now notice, let's look at the information to the left drawing that points to the receptacle, and it has a kind of a call out violation, and it says 10 amp receptacle outlets in 210.23A1 and A2. It'd be a violation to supply those kind of outlets. And then it gives you loads permitted at the very top. You see lights, little gas-fired place, different types like an exhaust fan, table lamps, floor lamps, and things like that. But now, loads that are not permitted to be supplied by a 10 amp circuit, you would see is a disposal, a garbage dispenser, a laundry equipment type circuit, a water heater type circuit. 10 amp circuits, branch circuits could not supply these types of loads. So it's what can be fed and what cannot be fed by a 10 amp branch circuit. Now, I like to, when I'm referencing permissive loads, maximum loads, things like that, I like to look at 3 tables. And I get all the information I need there, even without even having to read the text to each one of these tables. But table 210.21b2, you want to review that as electrician. 210.21b3, and finally table 210.24.1 and 2. And you know, those 2 tables covers everything. It covers the previous tables in text. It's all outlined there for you, that you can just pick up all the information you need to design a branch circuit, install a branch circuit, and the kind of loads that you can supply and that kind of thing. So that's what this change here basically is. It deals with permissive loads, multi-outlet branch circuits, and a 10 amp branch circuit, what it can feed and what it cannot feed, in accordance with 210.23a1 and a2. And for better wording, it's loads permitted to be supplied and loads that are not permitted to be supplied. Now, this illustration deals with branch circuit requirements, and it's kind of a summary of NEC 210.24. And of course, tables 210.24.1 deals with copper conductors that terminate. Table 210.24.2 deals with aluminum and copper conductors and how they terminate. But notice it's a summary of the table. And there's 2 of them, 1 and 2 to 210.24. And basically, it's a summary of all of the rules for branch circuit loading. And notice that in this illustration, you have a 10 amp to 50 amp circuit there. And you can supply 10, 15, or 20 50 amp circuits to lighting under certain conditions. But notice you cannot supply appliances, as you see where it says not permitted if number 10 circuit, right there, that receptacle, and you see it on appliance there, it's cord and plug connected in accordance to 210.23a2. Then you have a television set there, maybe another kind of monitor, cannot be connected to that 10 amp. And if you go over and look at the non-lighting load rated 10 amps to 50 amps there, receptacle rated 50 amps or less, and then it has the blue call out text there, multi-outlet branch circuits, inner raceway rated 50 amps or less and routed to other than receptacle outlets per 210.24 and 210.23a2. And so the main purpose of this change is just a note that was added and accepted by the code panel to make it clear to the users of the code that receptacle outlets that are not permitted to be on a 10 amp branch circuit. And that's what this illustration is illustrating. And of course, you can read more about it on page 85 of the NEC. Or again, read it with the text and the author's comment, along with the purpose of the circuit and Stallcup's illustrated code change book. So this is basically what this illustration here is illustrating to the user of the NEC. Now, this illustration deals with islands and peninsulas, countertops, and work surfaces in accordance with NEC 210.52C2. Now, notice there's 3 conditions here. you have a countertop with a wall behind it. You have a peninsula with no wall front and back of the peninsula. You have an island under the same conditions. But notice we used to have to take these peninsulas and islands, and based upon a square foot area, you might need 3 or 4 plugs, and it was very difficult to install these plugs in the countertop or the work space area. And sometimes the owner of the dwelling unit didn't want them there, period. Sometimes the builder didn't want to install them there due to the objections of the homeowner. So now what's required, you don't have to put a receptacle there, but you have to provide a branch circuit and a means to put one later if it was, the owner of the dwelling unit wanted to add one later. So there's big relief here, see. But you have a number of call outs here for your review, but I would caution you to review Article 100 and Divine Countertop, Peninsula, and Island. It's in Article 100. 210.A6 with GFCI protection and 210.12 for AFCI protection, 210.52C2 for the installation rules, and then in the countertops and workspace areas where the types of receptacles could be installed is in 406.4D as in dog and 406.5E through G. And that's what this purpose of change is all about, is providing relief from the 2020 edition of the NEC by only requiring a means to be provided if a plug was to be added later. Now this illustration deals with lighting outlet required in accordance with NEC 210.70, and you can review this requirement on page 89 of the NEC. But now the purpose of the change is fully illustrated in the note to the right-hand side above the illustration there of the dwelling unit. And notice it states that switched lighting devices shall not depend only on a battery-powered system as outlined in 210.70 unless a means is provided automatically energizing lighting outlet upon battery power failure. And you can kind of see a little illustration of such there, boxed in and has a wall switch receptacle 210.70A1. But in this dwelling unit, you can see lighting outlets and switches and so forth that are controlled by wall switches. And of course, in accordance with 210.70A1 as well as the exception 1. But now, if you want to know more about these switches, whether single pole, 3-pole, 4-way, and so forth, just go over to 404.6A through C, 404.14A through G, and 410.10A through F. Now, I'll say that one more time. 404.6A through C, 404.14A through G, and 410.10A through F. And that's what this illustration is kind of illustrating, is that you can't provide only on the battery system alone. You need a power circuit routed there also, and that's exactly what this illustration is illustrating to the user of the NEC. Now this illustration deals with dwelling units, areas such as habitable rooms, kitchens, laundry areas, and bathrooms, in accordance with NEC 210.70A1. Now notice the note right below, or say the right-hand side of the basement there. It reads at least one lighting outlet should be installed in kitchens, bathrooms, and laundry areas as outlined in 210.70A1. And of course you have your bathroom lighting outlet and your kitchen outlet lighting out and so forth. You have your basement here where it's used as a for washing and drying clothes and so forth, along with maybe a refrigerator there maybe. or deep freeze, either one. But notice a lighting outlet is also required for a crawl space. And of course that's 210.8C. And that lighting outlet is not to be on a GFCI protected circuit in accordance with 210.8C. A receptacle now is also required in a crawl space in accordance with 210.8A4. And notice the opening of that crawl space should be at least 22 inches by 30 inches in accordance with 110.16 for limited spaces. So basically, you can find 210.70A1 on page 89 of your NEC. And that's the basic concept of this revision that was accepted, is to require lighting outlets in areas so the appropriate illumination will be provided for the task involved in providing a margin of safety. And that's what this illustration is illustrating to the user of the NEC. Now this illustration deals with dwelling units, additional locations. Such a location would be like steps for a bulkhead area where you'd exit from a basement to grade level. Now, the purpose of the change mainly is just to provide a lighting outlet at a bulkhead entrance door with steps. And these steps are less than 6 steps here, so we just need a light there and a controlling means. So let's take a look at the note to the right at the top of the illustration. It says, for control of lighting outlet, see 210.70A exception to 2, And then also we're referenced to see 210.70A4. You should, I recommend that you reference that section and read it. And then the next note says that a lighting outlet is required. Why is it required? To illuminate the steps. For what reason? For an outdoor bulkhead door is outlined and required per 210.70A2 exception to 2. And then the note right below the bulkhead door and the steps there at the bottom of the illustration says that there are less than 6 steps per 210.70A exception to 1, 2, and 3. Now, if we want to look at the also review information, then also review the revision to 210.70A21 through A24, as well as pertinent exceptions that will aid the user of the NEC for providing lighting with less than 6 steps or more than 6 steps. We'd have maybe another landing and so forth. We're just saying if that happens to be the case. So that's what this illustration is mainly illustrating, is that at least one lighting outlet would be required at a bulkhead door entry or exit with steps up to grade level from a basement in accordance with 210.70A2 exception to 2. And that's mainly what this illustration is illustrating to the user of the NEC.